Hello there gorgeous gamers and welcome back to Pure Play TV, and we have a review for the psychological horror game Martha is Dead. But is it scary good or frighteningly shite? Watch the review and find out. Martha is Dead takes place in Italy in 1944 and follows the story of Giulia after the death of her twin, the aforementioned Martha, if you hadn't already guessed from the title. All pretty standard fare when it comes to horror games, so what makes Martha is Dead any different? In short, nothing much, but for whatever reason, the powers that be at Sony decided that certain aspects of Martha is Dead required censorship. In 2022. Yay. Such a decision has kicked up quite the hornet's nest, and it's this, instead of the dark and twisted story or the narrative-driven gameplay, that has thrust Martha is Dead into the spotlight. Martha is Dead went from a game on the cusp of release that most of us had never heard of into a game that horror fans could not wait to get their hands on. There's no such thing as bad publicity, or so the saying goes, and with that in mind, developer LKA must have been rubbing their hands together. After 6 hours, I honestly didn't know what the fuss was all about. Yes, there are some gory sequences, but nothing more outlandish or brutal than a few other games I've played. Did I feel uncomfortable? Yeah, at times, but is this enough for the game to warrant censorship? I'm a bit conflicted on that one. In a nutshell, Martha is Dead is driven forward mainly by its narrative, and from the beginning, it didn't really grip me in ways that it should have. Although aspects of the story are interesting, overall it's a fairly standard horror game. After discovering her sister drowned in the lake, Giulia assumes the identity of her sister Martha, and the game goes from there in what is one of the strangest decisions I've ever encountered in a video game. By default, the audio narration is set to Italian, which I admit did have a slightly more immersive effect on me than I originally thought it would. But because I'm British, I quickly sacked that off and changed it to English to avoid having to read every single line of dialogue, and I must say that the English narration does not seem to convey the same level of urgency or give Giulia as much personality as the Italian one does. It comes off as dry and devoid of emotion. When paired with some of the events on screen, this is very jarring. This is a major missed opportunity, as not only does the narration do much of the heavy lifting when it comes to telling the story, but there are some gory moments at certain points throughout the game, and the sad thing is that these few horrific sections feel a bit shoehorned in, simply there for the sake of adding shock value, adding nothing more than a bit of blood and guts into what is essentially a twist on the traditional Lady in the Lake story. The few scenes that do shock in their brutality rely heavily on shock value more than any outright jump scare or horror in the typical sense of the word. Much of what Giulia experiences in these moments, while certainly uncomfortable or at times hard to watch, feel a little needless in what they depict, and they don't really move the story forward in any meaningful way. Cutting these scenes entirely would not have had any negative impact on the overall game or the narrative. And if you would rather, the game does allow you to play a further censored version with this option presented to you at the start. I didn't play it this way, but I assume it cuts out or pixelates these scenes in question. Martha is Dead does not shy away from the fact it is a very graphic game. Even having said all that, I still think censorship is a cheap way out, particularly when it's preferred to offending people who probably shouldn't be playing the game in the first place, especially when you take into account all of the warnings that the game offers from the start. It would be like blue-haired, nose-ringed Mandy going to a Dave Chappelle show. It just wouldn't make sense, unless you're looking for something to have a moan about. I will admit that I was pleasantly surprised with the time I spent playing. Although the story failed to pull me in, Martha is Dead is a wonderful looking game, and I was really surprised at the level of detail that the villa and the surrounding areas had. Martha is Dead takes place over a small area consisting of a villa, a surrounding forest, and a lake. These areas are initially fun and interesting to explore, but this does quickly wane. Martha is Dead requires a lot of back and forth between the villa and the lake, and make no mistake, this is no action-adventure game. Even using the sprint button, Guilia lacks a little when it comes to pace, so this back and forth can get a bit tiresome, especially during the game's second half. One of the standout features of the game is the surprisingly deep photography system that much of the story leans on. Guilia is a keen photographer, and early on you come to possess an authentic era camera. Through a tutorial, you're shown how to take photos, adjust the focus and exposure, or even combine different lenses to apply filters and effects. Once each photo has been taken, you then have to develop them using the darkroom found in the basement of the villa. On paper, that might sound very boring, but in practice the game makes each section interesting and fun to a point that I was surprised in how much I enjoyed these sections, even if they do feel a little overused toward the end. Some of the game's collectibles incorporate this feature too, and by using a special infrared attachment for the camera, you can photo things invisible to the naked eye, further adding to the otherworldly goings-on. Plus, the camera is available to use at almost any point, so you're not limited to a particular moment or section. During my 6 hours or so with Martha is Dead, I did experience a wide variety of bugs, ranging from the small and easy to ignore, but up to and including a few really unpleasant ones. These included 4 separate instances of the game's soft locking when playing on PS5, and 2 where the game outright crashed to the home screen. Luckily, Martha is Dead has a really robust autosave system, so the few times I did encounter an issue, I was lucky in that I didn't lose too much progress. So, Martha is Dead. Is it any good? Being totally honest, I was surprised that I did find myself really enjoying some of the game's additional features. Taking photos using the camera and developing them is fun, alongside a side quest that has you send and receive covert messages using Morse code. The world is really well detailed and fun to explore in parts, but the story itself leaves a lot to be desired. Between the few gory sections that feel heavy-handed to a few gameplay decisions that seem to make no sense, and I'm thinking particularly about a sudden sharp twist that happens in the game's final act, which definitely comes out of left field. Martha is Dead is not a game without its problems. As someone who would not consider themselves a fan of horror, I was actually shocked, pun intended, at how much I actually enjoyed playing Martha is Dead, and I will definitely keep my eyes out for what LKA does next. And that is the end of this review. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, do us a solid by liking, subscribing, and turning on notifications so that you know when we've got new stuff for you to watch. I've been Chris, you've been gorgeous, and I'll see you on the next one. Until then, cheers my dears.